So the hot sun is again adding to the tension of this conversation that they're having, and their tempers are rising, right, with the heat of the sun as well. If you look more closely, we also get some details about where they're situated in relationship to the hills. So they're in the middle of this valley, and on this side of the valley, the country is the countryside has no shade, no trees, and they're in the hot sun. So the country is all brown and dry. And then it's only in the distance where when Jig looks on the other side and she sees fields of grain and trees along the banks of the Ebro, and she can see in the distance all this sort of lush greenery. So there are two sides, the hills on the dry side of the valley. So there's a dry side of the valley and then this lush green side of the valley. And this seems to also be indicative of their situation and the argument that they're having. So when we think about the dry versus the fields, the two sides of the valley, we can also associate these with ideas of life and death, fertility and barrenness, and how they relate to the pregnancy itself. So when Jig is looking off in the distance and looking at the green, lush, and the river that gives life to all that greenery, she is also contemplating her own role as giving life to a child. And then the dry side of the valley is again, there's no trees, so there's no life there. And it again suggests, it sort of goes back to that idea of letting the air in, right? So it's very dry, arid land, and again seems to be connected, at least symbolically, to the possible choice of having an abortion. So we see this represented in the landscape. And then the final detail that we have not yet talked about is the hills themselves. So the hills in the distance are described as long and white. So we can again read into that detail. So the color white seems to stand out as particularly important. So when we think of cultural associations with the color white, we might think about how white is often associated with purity, innocence. So the white hills might also connect back to the innocent life of their unborn child, or to their own sort of sense of how they were naive and innocent before this all occurred. And as well, we have hills in the distance. So when you think about hills, we might also have a subtle allusion to the fact that Jig is pregnant. So the mound of the hills could be sort of seen as a representation of the shape of maybe a pregnant woman's belly, her abdomen, and how she's, swollen and growing with life. So the hills in that regard could also be a representation of this physical pregnancy. So the pregnant belly of the pregnant woman. So Jig. Finally, there's the question of the fact that Jig refers to the hills in the background as white elephants. And she first says this and then takes it back. So I asked you guys to again Google and find a definition for the term white elephants. It's an idiom that exists. So again, we can think about all the connotations of the white elephant as a phrase and what it means in the context of the story. So if you looked up white elephant, you probably found that it is a reference to something that is given that is often seen as a burden rather than a gift. So it becomes an object that is more of a burden than it is a gift. An example would be if you were given or gifted a puppy, and then you felt like this gift was again more of a burden because of the cost of dog food or the task of having to take it for a walk every day. So it's sort of the burden of it outweighs the gift of that object. So the value of it. White elephants are also viewed in Eastern cultures as being sacred and precious. So there is really two sides to this phrase. So on one side you have something sacred, precious, rare, and special, and then on the other side you have something that is supposedly a burden that you are gifted, right? So it's a burden on one side, something sacred and precious on the other. So we have that same dichotomy in relationship to how Jig and the American view this pregnancy. Other sort of significant phrases such that involve the elephant are also associated to this story. So we might think about the saying, an elephant in the room. That would also be very much applicable in how the couple has this conversation that sort of avoids the topic. So they circle around this issue of abortion without ever saying it. So again, it becomes this elephant in the room. And you might have also heard of the phrase, an elephant never forgets. So that could also imply to the fact that once they go through with this situation, it's something you will never forget in your life, or again, it's a life-changing decision that they are about to make. So if we were going to sort of narrow down a central theme or idea that captures the meaning of this story, I think we could be drawn to this idea, this one line where Jig says, once they take it away, you never get it back. And in this line, we get the sense of, it is still ambiguous, right? The it in that sentence is unclear of what exactly they're referring to, but we can read into this this line and suggest how no matter what decision this young couple makes, whether to keep the baby or to go through with the abortion, their lives are never going to be the same, right? And you can't ever sort of go back to the way things were, the way the American thinks they can, or he sort of promises this. You can't really do that in this situation, right? So the things have changed in their relationship, and you can't ever go back after you make this decision. So we can again see the importance of this moment when their innocence is lost, and again the sort of youthful, carefree lifestyle that they once had is never to be reclaimed from this point on. So we are left with a very open-ended story, and depending on your perspective of these characters, again, you might find different possibilities in this open ending of what might happen once the train gets there, but we are never given a sort of firm answer of what the couple will decide to do. Some possible endings could be that Jig has the abortion and then stays with the American, and things return to the way they were. I think we can scratch that one out because from that following, from the preceding discussion, I think we can see that their lives aren't going to be forever changed from this moment on. Possibility number 2 would be Jig going through with the abortion but breaking up with the American. This is kind of possible, I would say. Her final words on page 168, he asks, do you feel better? And then she says, I feel fine. She said, there's nothing wrong with me. I feel fine. So I don't know how many of you have relationships, but when a woman says, I feel fine, she often is anything but fine, right? So I think in this sense, Jig maybe has made up her mind. She's not revealing it at this time, but it seems to be she maybe has come up with a conclusion in her own mind about the decision that she's going to make. So again, we still don't know for sure, but again, it's possible that they are going to break up at this point. And then the third possibility is Jig doesn't have the abortion because the American yields to her perspective. So again, it's possible as well that they go through with the pregnancy and have the child either staying together or breaking up. So again, it's very much open-ended and we don't know for sure, but we can read into and make our predictions at this point. but very little is conclusively given in the denouement of the story. So just to wrap up today's discussion, we can sort of again see how Hemingway's sparse style, on the surface it seems very simplistic, it's just dialogue, but again we can read so much more into it and look at the layers of meaning that he builds through setting, through the sort of tense atmosphere created between the characters' dialogue, and all those little details that he puts in that gives us little hints at what they are really talking about and the consequences of this heavy, heavy decision that they're in the midst of deciding for their lives, which will affect them for the rest of their lives. The next story that we'll be discussing is Hawthorne's The Birthmark, which is not in your Broadview anthology of short fiction. It's actually only available online. So I've posted a link, and again, it'll be posted on our course homepage. So that's the next story that I'll be talking about.